Many years ago, I came across this book. I know you don't have it in English yet, but maybe something the sisters could undertake, this translation. It's the first book we published as Pro Iglesia Santa on Father Menor's writings. I remember very vividly the time that I read this book. It was the year 2007. It was July. And I was, in that moment of my life, so excited and anxious about starting the seminary and the novitiate. My heart was really on fire. Wanted to give myself to God. And I came across this book. And this book, it was very helpful for me in that moment. And I wanted to share an extract of Father Menor's writings. I'll translate it the best I can, but I want to give you context on the moment of my life I'm going to, this extract is coming from. So Father Menor, when he was around middle age, like in his 50s, he was living in a place of Peru called Arequipa. And he undertook a very important mission. He was in charge of starting a parish there, in a more or less poor place of Arequipa. And he worked in that parish for about 10 years. He built it from scratch. And he gave the best of his energy, the best of his talents to make that parish thrive and to be built. And then suddenly he received a very sad news for him, because the Jesuits, he was a Jesuit, he had to leave the parish because there were not enough Jesuits for all the work that they had in Arequipa. So he said it was a very difficult moment for him. Obviously, he had the capacity of a saint, not to stay with his own sentiments, but to look God's hand. So after he was done with Arequipa, he was sent back to Lima. And he was going through a moment where he was a little bit sick, because he had worked with such impetus in Arequipa for 10 years that his strength was starting to, in Arequipa, you know what time did he wake up every morning? 3:30. Why? Because he wanted to do his prayer from 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. and then he could open the church at 5 a.m. already having done his prayer. It is a time in his life where he was sleeping, not in a normal bed, but only on top of like a bench. Let's say it that way. He was a very penitent man. So he came back to Lima, and then he started writing his diary in this new moment of his life. He was going to live like in a care place for the Jesuit priests who were a little bit older and sick. So this is what he wrote. One night, before going to bed, I felt an invitation, a very sudden invitation to rest. Like to take a time off, because he had given so much of himself in Arequipa, and he was becoming older. And then he answers to this invitation to rest. But it's not a time for me to rest. No, I'm sorry. So he listens to this invitation and says, "You're done with working. It's time for you to rest. It's time for you to retire." And he says, "This word, it hurt me. And I confess you, Lord, how miserable I am." He says, "Who is making this invitation to me? This invitation to retire?" He says, "It's the demon." He says, "No, I cannot retire. I must continue, and I must never leave penitence." And he says, what a poor reaction on the son of St. Ignatius. So why did I think it was relevant for me to share with you this moment of his life? Because it reminds us that we should never give up in our desire to be holy. And I think that this new year that is starting with Catholic Advance should be a moment for us to take upon again the invitation to be holy. The only reason why we're here in this general meeting, the only reason why Catholic Advance exists, is because we want to renew the invitation that the Lord is making to each one of us to be holy. And you know, how did Father Menor understood holiness as the complete opposite to mediocrity. Because we tend to be mediocre in our spiritual life. We tend to lower our bar. So I think that each meeting that Catholic Advance holds should be a meeting in which we again hear that invitation and we again become passionate about that invitation. So brothers and sisters, as this new year starts again, let us renew our commitment to reject everything that is mediocre in our life. Everything that is lukewarm. In the same way that Father Menor, when he heard that invitation to, it's time to rest, it's time to take things low-key, he said, no. Even though he had worked so hard, even though he had been so penitent, he said, it's time again, or it's time to start all over again in my desire to be holy. And one more thing. I think it's important for our movement to keep growing. And I think that the ladies' groups are growing, but the men's groups have stalled. And I think that a sign that a movement is alive is growth. And I think we should take upon ourselves to make the movement grow. Ladies, get your husbands involved. Men, get your friends involved. This calling to holiness is supposed to make average Catholics content with minimum requirements to take a step up and to say, I also can and want to be holy. But we have to get this invitation out. And this movement is not going to grow if the members are not taking upon themselves the task of inviting others. And I think that this invitation is worthy of being spread out in the world. Catholics need to hear this invitation. And we have to take this invitation upon ourselves. Do not rest, reject mediocrity, reject being lukewarm. Take upon ourselves the calling to holiness with renewed impetus, starting from today.